Hey everyone, I'm Goose, and this is our first session of TPK 101, and it is brought to you by Pear Studios. See, I'm here today with the man himself from Pear. Pete, why don't you introduce yourself?
I'm Pete Saloom, and I'm the founder and writer at Pear Studio. We're an ACE licensee at Pinnacle Entertainment, and we make awesome adventures for Savage Worlds.
This is the first episode in a new series that we are, again, calling TPK 101, where we are going to be talking about how to make different kinds of encounters better, how to make them more fun. And today we're going to start with just talking about a very basic encounter. Nothing too spectacular, nothing too complicated, and just seeing how we can maybe spice it up and make it more interesting and engaging for your players rather than just kind of running it very like, take your turn, you take your turn, you take your turn. That's kind of boring, right? Yeah.
There's systems that are built for that, and Savage Worlds isn't one of them. And so we would like to harness, all the fun that is available to GMs and players in the Savage Worlds system. I'd like to just say that the premise of this show as well is to talk to the audience and find out what encounters they have. Send them to us and we'll armchair quarterback them and tell you everything you're doing is wrong. That's what we're here for.
Armchair GMing, getting everything out of context, but we're going to do our best to try to help you as much as possible. I guess we'll just go ahead and dive into the first encounter that we're going to talk about for our first episode. Sound good? So this is an encounter that I did run and I think could be improved. And so this is the encounter I brought to the table with Pete today to try to see what he has for us on what we could improve about the encounter. For spoilers, though, this is a real encounter, sort of. This is a modified encounter that I modified slightly for a section of book 2 of the Rise of the Rune Lords Adventure Path for Pathfinder for Savage Worlds.
Okay.
Yeah, so keeping that in mind. So slight spoiler there, but I don't think that matters a whole lot. And because by the time you get here, you know what's happening, kind of.
Slight spoiler, there are encounters.
So in this encounter, the players came to a farmhouse and in a barn, and they've been fighting ghouls along the way, and they're expecting some more ghouls they're going to have to take out. And they get up to the house. They actually sneak into the house, but the ghouls have heard the fighting on the way. Coming up to the house, they know they're coming, so they've prepared. Some of them have hidden under the porch, some of them have hidden upstairs, and they've basically stayed out of the front room where the player's going to kind of go up to, so they can try to surprise them. And the way that this ran is exactly how it happened, and we're not really focusing on the surprise aspect of this, but more the rest of the combat after the surprise. So they went in, they saw some horrific events, and at this point the ghouls attacked. There's 3 players and there was like 8 ghouls. Some of them came in from inside and attacked the player that went inside. So the ghouls from underneath came out from underneath the porch and attacked the players from the other side. And then there was 3 ghouls that really didn't have any room to maneuver inside, and I realized I kind of sent them around the back of the house so they could sneak around and kind of reinforce from that side as well. And then there was one ghast that was part of it. He was like the one wild card that was kind of part of this combat. Yeah. And the way that the combat went for me, then I'm asking Pete here to kind of help me figure out what I could have done differently, is that this basically just ended up being each of the monsters took their attack and took their turn. The players took theirs, kind of wiping them out because the ghouls are wild cards. It wasn't super hard for the players to kind of take them out. They had a lot of abilities, very martial characters. Some of them had sweep. Pete, where do you want to start? What questions do you have for me? What do you want to know on like what I could have done to make this a little bit more interesting?
Yeah. So basically, when I look at this, what I understand is you've got your player characters investigating these. The report was of these, I believe, quote unquote, walking scarecrows is what right. You had kind of sent over to me on the description at a farm. When they get there, they're basically the enemy. These ghouls and the ghast already know that the players are coming. So that's an important detail to me, because that means certain things will and will not happen, right? Because they have time to kind of lay their trap. And then the players go in, and it sounds like what happened was basically what I would call more of a generic hack and slash. It's my turn, I hit you. It's your turn, you hit me combat, yep. Which is sort of the status quo encounter when nothing else is done to mitigate that. So if I had to give it a grade, I'd say, okay, that's an encounter that probably goes right by the rules and accomplishes whatever the plot point campaign, asked you to accomplish. But I don't think it really sets anybody on fire in terms of, excitement or dynamic gameplay or anything like that. So I'm going to be harsh on you. I'm going to give you a C on your encounter.
That's fine.
But I think we can turn it into an A with little work if we understand some more things. I go through sort of a checklist of things, not line by line when I make encounters, but I have certain things I think about whenever I make encounters, and not all of them apply to every encounter, but they're good things to think about, even if you're just ruling them out. The first one I think about is sort of the why the players are in the encounter in the first place and what are the victory conditions, because this goes to the motivation of the players, right?
Mm-hmm.
Your players are walking up to this farmhouse. I believe one of your players in the description may have discovered what was going on in the farmhouse. Was that correct?
Yeah. So one of them, I mean, they kind of knew a little bit as they were fighting things along the way that something bad was happening.
Okay.
And they kind of got a sense of what they were fighting. And the one player did discover basically a body inside that was eaten. We'll say eaten because by these monsters. Yeah. And it was a little bit of a horrific event.
Right away, I say, if I'm in the character shoes, why am I going in there? We just went in, we looked. It's terrible in there. I didn't see any survivors, did I? I don't know. It's a farmhouse full of terror and death. I think I'm going to go home. is the sort of the immediate motivation that I get if I don't have other information, right? So what are the victory conditions here? Obviously, if we just have a sort of a stock combat, the victory condition is don't die or defeat the enemy, right? That would be the stock victory conditions. But by including like maybe even just one survivor or captive or something like that in this encounter, you're going to give player characters a reason to look at who their character is, what their values are, and whether that means something or not to them. And there's definitely going to be a conversation between your characters or your players at the table if they're at odds on that. For example, they approach the house, they see these this terrible situation, but from the second story window there is a child or two that are still kind of looking for help or are spotted. This changes the dynamic of the victory conditions right away, right? Because you're going to get different character actions now.
Yeah actually, so like and to kind of add on, like along the way they were facing some like these scarecrows. A lot of them were like placed there for the monster, for the people to turn into these monsters, and some of them had not turned yet and they saved them. So there were some already actually like out amongst the fields they saved. So putting one like on the roof or something, or like a weather vane, that would have been really cool to see. Yeah, 100%.
The obvious next question is then what are the losing conditions? Clearly being killed is one of the losing conditions. But when you bring in that there might be survivors or there might be innocents that need rescue or other objectives, whatever they may be, then there are other stakes in the encounter. Maybe it is, we're going to escape with our lives because we're just going to turn around and go back to town. But then those survivors we spotted, they're really going to be helpless without us. The stakes are higher. The decisions are more serious. They're going to have more skin in the game if they want to go through it. If you have narrative consequences for the rest of the campaign, I can't speak to the Pathfinder campaign you're running because I just don't know where you're at or what the details are. But if you can create those narrative consequences for failure here that are more long-term, whether they know it or not, it's going to be a more impactful encounter. If they know it, it'll be a more impactful encounter right now. If they don't know it, it'll be a more impactful encounter when they realize, the cost they are paying down the road for what has happened at this farmhouse.
That's a very good setup. I'm already feeling chills. That's a really
good. We want this to be scary. I want to terrify you. So let me terrify you with some information about duration limits on encounters here. Most encounters in Savage Worlds don't have a set duration limit. What I mean by that is the GM deals out some action cards. There's some stuff happening, and they're going to deal out action cards every round until basically there is complete resolution and they have no reason to deal those action cards anymore. But that doesn't have to be the case. When you add other narrative consequences, when you add survivors, when you add other structured things that happen in an encounter, you can control the encounter a little bit from the GM's perspective, and you also make it sort of an ever-changing obstacle for your players, meaning just the idea that every round we're just going to attack with the weapon we are best equipped with, it will not always be the best idea. Sometimes that means you have to kind of map out, like, here's the first 5 rounds, and on round 1 this happens, and on round 2 this happens, and on round 3 this happens, and they're very different things that occur. I'll give you some examples. A big one is environmental hazards. I assumed, because this was undead stuff, my mind just immediately went to that this was the middle of the night. And then you told me it wasn't. It was during the day.
Yeah, technically it was during the day. Yeah.
And so that changed my whole perspective of the encounter. First of all, was like, this is a midday encounter with the undead, which is like, maybe just to me, like, weird. But it's okay. So think about what the environment is. I know, I looked at the stats of the ghouls and the ghast, and there was nothing changed for them, day versus night. I thought that would be kind of cool. Like, if there was something that had to do with them enjoying the cover of darkness or benefiting from the cover of darkness or something like that.
The only thing they get if there was darkness is that because they're undead, they get to ignore certain illumination penalties.
Yeah. And obviously illumination penalties are a huge thing in encounters. So whenever you do have an encounter that is staged not just at night, but in a dark place, so underground or just in a building with the lights off, or there is something else that is preventing their vision that isn't actually lighting. So I'm going to say, like, on a dusty sci-fi planet where the red dust is, flying up in the wind, that type of thing, you can sort of use illumination penalties the same way. That should always be used. You should always make it harder when it's harder to see. You should always make it harder for your characters to do sight-based things and have them rely on other things. They're going to end up trying to feel around for stuff. They're going to end up listening more if they can, things like that. So that's one environmental hazard. The other one you have here is, I thought of this old farmhouse. I don't know how old it is, but in my head, I pictured it was rickety, and they go in and there's already this fight that has already occurred in there, I believe, because there are bodies, and now there's this other fight that is occurring. And I thought, okay, this structure, it might be cool if this structure was under stress, in that, like, if in round 2 or something, the floorboard started to give way, or if they were on the second floor, maybe the staircase started to give way or something because of this old rickety condition of the house. That's very cool because you can control it and they don't see it coming. So you can just announce it. For example, they do whatever they're going to do in round 1. Maybe they kill some of these ghouls. Maybe the ghouls kill some of them, whatever happens. And in round 2, you say, by the way, anybody who starts on the staircase in this round, please roll your agility, as the railing comes toppling off from disuse and disrepair. If you fail, you're going to be falling back to the ground floor. Players never see that stuff coming, but they're often like, oh yeah, of course. Yeah. We were all running up the stairs and, like, swinging swords around, something's going to break. Those type of environmental hazards for this particular campaign, for this particular encounter, are cool. I would say environmental encounters are very important. It might not be the most important thing in this particular encounter.
Right. But for narrative reasons, though, it adds a lot to the feeling of the encounter, just to, like, by having that narrative change, and it really kind of places the players in the environment more, where they're imagining it more.
To me, anyway, it's more immersive. You feel like these things are happening. The player is trying to control what they want to have happen in the encounter, and then they realize the circumstance is also happening to them, without some of their control. And so it's a give and take. It's not just, here's the guys, here's the stats. If your rolls are better than their rolls, then you're done with them. There's other complications in it, which are, to me, that's a more interesting session. The next thing, if I can move on to another thing, is just key events in the encounter. Key events could be anything as a GM you want to have happen, and you want it kind of scripted into this encounter, meaning almost regardless of what the players do, you want to get this piece in to the encounter some way. And It doesn't take away the agency of the players because depending on their actions, it may be less impactful or more impactful, whatever this key element is. But you should always define what these key elements are. Mm-hmm. In this particular encounter, I feel like ghouls are, their motivation, I think, and I could be wrong, is they want to turn other living beings by killing them and turning them. And so that makes them hunters, in my opinion. They are hunters of the living. And so they have to act like hunters that are trying to corner and hunt their prey. So now you have to think about, well, how would they do that? They wouldn't all wait in the living room for somebody to walk in the front door. They would have a plan because they do this. This is what they are by nature, right? Mm-hmm. So key events in an encounter where you have a hunter like that are, especially if they know these folks are coming, they're certainly going to plan a very good ambush because they're going to want to make this easy. They don't want to use more energy than they need to. They don't want to get killed, certainly. And they know just what to do. So something I would think of is they would find a way to lure or bait these people, these player characters, into whatever the most opportune trap they could create was, given the time that they have. Mm-hmm. In one way you can do that is don't introduce all the foes right off the bat, before the first action cards are dealt. When the first round happens, perhaps the heroes run in and they are engaged with some of these ghouls. Perhaps they run in and they see no ghouls and they're attempting to save a survivor who is actually bait, and this trap is sprung. And I would say round 2 or round 3, the actual hunters will be introduced into the encounter when you've got your player characters distracted, already used some of their resources. Some of them might be shaken or worse at that time. And then all of a sudden the real trap is laid. Just like how lions, hunt in the wild. It's like they move the prey around until they're in the right place. And then the real killer shows up and does the dirty work. So that's something that you would want to have sort of in your head before this encounter starts is, oh yeah, in round 3, 4 of these ghouls come through the front windows, behind them. And they're not going to know anything about that until it occurs, and they're going to have to adapt. Make sense?
Yeah. Would you incorporate the stealth, using stealth in for those kinds of encounters? So they're trying to sneak in through a window or something?
If you want them to sneak, yes. Yeah. If you want them to sneak, use their stealth. Obviously that's an opposed roll.
Right.
Although I would be kind of strict with if you're in melee combat with somebody else and someone's trying to stealth in the window behind you, you're definitely not going to get a straight notice roll.
Right.
-2, -4, somewhere in
and for some of them, sometimes if they're not looking for it, you may even argue it's not opposed actually at all. They're just trying to get a 4. The person that's stealthing is just trying to get a 4. These other people.
It may just be just achieve it and they do it. And then, so now you've got the problem of the drop, and the ramifications of that. And this is now getting to be really deadly for the player characters. We're talking TPK 101. We might be close to that with 3-player characters here. It's certainly not going to be a walk through the park for them. I didn't have any mention of featured game mechanics. So this was basically just a straight combat. In your write-up of it, there was no other type of game mechanic that was introduced in this encounter. What I mean by that is there wasn't a dramatic task. Didn't turn into a chase. It was just kind of a straightforward combat, and that's fine.
It was a very straightforward combat.
There's nothing wrong with that. I'm not saying every encounter has to have some other mechanic intertwined in it. That would get tedious after a while. But you should ask yourself when you're designing every once in a while, is there a subsystem or another mechanic that would improve this? Because sometimes there is. I have a lot of fun with intertwining dramatic tasks into combats. I know that's not rules as written, but it's really fun because
I've done it several times. I love putting dramatic tasks inside of
it. Yeah, it makes a player make a decision. They say I'm not even going to participate in this combat because I am focused on this task. You guys better keep these bad guys off of me so that I can deal with this saving the survivors and pulling them out of this house. You could say this house in round 2, this house catches on fire. And so now it's a dramatic task to remove survivors. Each success token is a survivor you pull out onto the front porch, or something like that. That's a whole nother thing, a whole nother layer of drama that you can introduce to this. You don't have to do it in every encounter, but certainly for set piece encounters, it can be really fun, especially like a big finale type of encounter for a one shot or for, a small arc in a campaign or something like that. That's what I would do in terms of what is happening during the actual encounter. The next piece is managing your foes, in this case, the ghouls and the ghast, in a way that is interesting and dynamic and challenging. Because certainly, I believe you could use them as just strictly melee fodder to fight back against your PCs. But I don't think that's probably the real way. It's not how real ghouls would act. Give them more strategy and also look at and understand all of their stats. So ghouls you sent me the stats on them. And although I was disappointed that they don't cause fear, because that's another thing that really elevates weird reactions in encounters, is starting to roll on the fear table. It shows that they have their standard bite and claw attack. Okay, that's fine. You could use that every round, maybe. It's a little generic, in my opinion. They've got all this other stuff in terms of infection and paralysis. They're also undead, which makes them a little tougher to deal with in terms of they're not going to stay shaken very long and things like that. I would lean into, in this case, probably their gang up bonus and their ability to ambush from different rounds of combat and not introducing them all together. That's what I feel would be the strength is. In round 2, 3 or 4 more of them jump through the front windows of the house, and they're going to go to whoever they think is the biggest threat. Might be a way to do it. Whoever they assess as the bigger threat, or it might be whoever's closest to finished off anyway. You could do it either way. Maybe they gang up on him. And gang up bonus is a thing that makes a big difference. It's a
strong thing too,
especially when combined. Gang up with 4 foes and wild attacks. I mean, it gets very punishing very quickly.
Yeah, and one of the things that these ghouls and a ghast has is the frenzy as well. So between the frenzy and the wild attacks and the gang up bonuses, things can get pretty dangerous for one person fairly quickly.
I don't know how many times I've read online, on Discord, on Facebook, wherever, a game master asking for advice where they say, all of my bosses and all of my combats are too easy. And I don't always reply, but I always think to myself, why? Because just this basic encounter that we're describing right now, it is terribly difficult for 3-player characters. If you really play it to the hilt, if you really dedicate yourself to it. I mean, there's just no way this could be described as easy.
Yeah. And I think a lot of times, and even myself, it's sometimes it's the forgetting certain abilities. It's forgetting how certain things work. I can tell you right now, a couple of things I forgot in this encounter. And this is something who I prepared. I was ready for this. I did have to, the encounter as written did not involve the goals doing an ambush, so that ambush part was me. And it's like, okay, I'm gonna have them like kind of come out from underneath the porch to attack them and to get behind them and to kind of gang up on these guys. But I still forgot things that, like the amount of times I've forgotten to do the +2 damage for wild attack, which is huge. That's huge. But I've forgotten it more times than I can count. And then for the undead, their +2 to unshaking, huge. That's a huge bonus that they get. But also, sometimes forget. So sometimes it's just a matter of, to your point about making encounters harder or for your players, is sometimes you just got to remember the abilities they have, and you have to like make sure that you know how things work.
We're calling this TPK 101, and it's tongue in cheek, right? Like my goal as a game master is not that I set up a game where I just want to annihilate my players. That's not like, that's never my goal, actually. If it happens, it happens. What I really want to have happen is I want them to deal with real threats in a really threatening way that creates a ton of tension at the table.
Mhm.
Because those are the most rewarding moments at the table is when people are, they know their comrade is on his third wound and they need to do something quick to get him out of danger. And this is spiraling out of control and the bennies are flying in, for either soak rolls or for whatever it is that it's going to take to either finish this off or give up and extract themselves from this situation, right? Those are the sessions we talk about afterwards where it's
Right.
like, that was close. You never really talk about when you roll in and annihilate everybody in melee combat in 2 rounds.
No one cares.
That's not, it's fine, but nobody's talking about it, a year later. People will really remember that type of stuff. It's important to do, in my opinion, and it's what I feel like other systems. There are other systems that do it well. The tension thing as well. There's Savage Worlds is not the only game capable of doing this, but it really is not something that every game system does well.
Right.
Attrition based systems don't do this as well because there's just this knowledge that everything is sort of 100% until it's 0%, which is sort of a different view.
Yeah, often those attrition HP systems, I say often, not always. This is not always true, and I get that for the people out there who are going to be defending that level. Not everything's like this, but often the tension doesn't happen until you're down and you're rolling death saves, right? That's when tension starts happening. Kind of like to your point is that I want my players to feel something. That's what I like about gaming, either in social encounters or in combat. I want them to feel something. That is my goal. I want you to feel you maybe angry or nervous or something about what's happening, for sure.
Or emotional about your character's values. Like, why are you fighting? Like, not to get too deep into this because I know it's a game, but like your player has decided to now fight with lethal force against something. To me, that's like very serious. And, so why did your character just decide they must do that? Like, and if they decided to do it, it should be a really good reason that they had to do it, unless, the character you're playing is a bloodthirsty maniac and they're just going to do it anyway. And that's okay.
I mean, that's a hindrance for a reason.
It's in the book for a reason. It occurs a lot. It's not just the social encounters. It's not just the outside of combat encounters stuff that lends the brilliant role playing. I've seen like some of the best role playing decisions for characters in these big combats where they go, "Oh my God, I just realized I can't kill this guy." Like, because he's too much like my grandfather who taught me everything I know about weird science. And, he was viewed as a maniac as well. And, I'm done. Let's non-lethal damage this guy and get him out of here. There's a lot of cool moments in games that are like that. It's because you don't need to kill the thing to get to the next level. And I know you're a big fan of that other system. And, I'm not trying to denigrate it whatsoever because I think it has a ton of merits, and I got a bunch of books sitting right over here that I like. Yeah, so
this one,
just disclosure. This is about making Savage Worlds encounters better, not saying other games can't do it.
And I would say that again, kind of to reiterate the point we kind of said at the outset, is that these systems can be applied to other systems. You can definitely think of a way. You may have to use different mechanics, and we're talking about. We talk about the drop. Yours is going to be surprise or whatever your system's version of that is. But so you can apply this, but we are going to obviously focus on Savage Worlds as two Savage Worlds gamers who love the game. I don't play this game. That's your point. I don't play this one as much as I used to. I play for the audio people. I'm pointing at my 5 ebooks. Because I pretty much almost play only Savage Worlds these days. Although I did just start in a 5e once a month campaign. Nice. So we'll see how that goes.
I love Dungeons and Dragons. I grew up like all of us, cutting my teeth on Dungeons and Dragons. I don't play 5e. I love playing OD&D. I love playing 2nd edition, advanced D&D, things like that. I've got nothing against it.
Yeah, I want to there's actually a part of me that lately that I'm wanting to try out some of these OSR games like Knave Second Edition and stuff. From what I've heard of people talking about them, there's a lot of roleplay that actually happens. Kind of to our point about combat encounters, is that OSR games can be a lot of combat encounters, but there's a lot more stuff that happens in those roleplay encounters, or in those combat encounters than maybe what we tend to do in these games. One of the things I definitely hear about, and this is kind of a little bit going off a little bit of a track, but in a rabbit hole, and we can talk about much more extended in another conversation at some point in the future. But often 5e, Savage Worlds, a lot of games, you kind of go role play, and then as soon as you get to a combat encounter, things just, you kind of like turn off the role playing element, and it's just becoming a tactical game that you're not really.
I dislike that. I don't enjoy that. That doesn't have to happen. And that's sort of the crux of kind of what we're talking about, is when you put all these other elements in, now your characters they're thinking about their hindrances within the context of the encounter. Now their phobia, is coming into play. Now their backstory is coming into play. And so it just makes it so much more rewarding, in my opinion. It's what I enjoy.
That is what we're here for. Kind of coming back to this encounter, what do we need to talk about?
Really not much else except for one big thing, which is, what is the consequence of failure of this encounter? That would be sort of the last thing that I would need to know, because the encounter just is lackluster if it just ends. If the foes are just defeated and they fall dead to the ground, and you stand around and your party is like, great, we have defeated them, off to the tavern. That to me it's not the worst thing in the world, but it could be so much more. So if they know what the consequences of success are and can kind of relate their characters to that, that's great. So like, if they're successful, these ghouls are not going to turn more of this local population's people, meaning they're probably going to become local heroes. They're probably going to go back to town and be celebrated with a parade or a feast or whatever it is in this particular setting. The consequence of failure, if they decide, we just don't like this and we're getting beat up, so we're going to leave and just ride our horses to the next town, is they have to know in their character's conscience that 2 weeks from now, those ghouls are still decimating the population of that village, and they've done nothing to check it. And there may be even downstream stuff in the campaign where something comes up and they need help from, I don't know, they need help from an NPC, an ally, but that ally has now developed a hatred for them for failing to save his hometown or his family or his family's farm. You could connect it to that, and that would be a consequence of failure. That's important to know. And it's important for the players at the table to know from like a metagaming perspective, because it changes what they do. Hey, if we leave now, there's no consequence. Okay, let's leave. If we leave now, this is going to haunt us for 4 more sessions, and I know it. That's a different thing. And I'm the type of GM where I like metagaming. I think it actually makes for, better gameplay at the table. I like people to discuss that sort of outside tactics that breaks the fourth wall a little bit. Tell them, if you can tell them, or if it's a common knowledge role or something like that, then introduce that, because it will change decisions.
Yeah. And so if you're the kind of GM that who does not like to just say outright, hey, if you do this, this is going to be a consequence, then you can call for a roll, right? So maybe you ask the person who makes the most sense to make an occult roll, to know more about ghouls. And you go, okay, that ghouls like to, one, obviously eat, and they eat a lot of people, but they also like to convert people because that's how they repopulate. And so that this little farmhouse is going to expand to the nearby farms as well, and that they are going to keep expanding unless you can deal with the problem now.
Absolutely. That's a great way to do it. Another way is to look at character backstories, if you can keep them in mind, and tie that in and say, look, your character is from the next village, And yeah, you've left home and you're going to travel far and wide, and you're not going to stay in your village and be a carrot farmer like the rest of your clan. But you do know this evil is going to spread. And when it spreads, it's going to your hometown.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
It's funny. One of the character that has been making the most successful occult roles to know about undead doesn't actually have a cult. They're untrained in it, but I allow them to make these roles. I allow them to make these roles not because they're because like, oh, they ask, but because their backstory does involve experience with undead, where their clan, like what their clan did was they fought undead. Their job as a clan was to fight undead to protect some ceremonial burial grounds. That was part of his backstory.
So they have family folklore or cultural folklore that they've heard, around the campfire for their whole life.
Exactly.
And it has nothing to do with actual real occult ability. It's just, I've heard this stuff my whole life. It can't not be real.
Part of their goal, right? You're talking about the kind of like reasons. Part of theirs was so that they hate undead because that's the way they grew up. So they not only did they want to stop the undead, they wanted to make sure that every single undead in this area that they could see was taken care of.
Well, that makes decisions a lot easier if you've got somebody like that in the party, because they're not leaving.
Right. Yeah. They were like, nope, we're taking this out until that. And then and they also have like the heroic hindrance. So anytime someone they did, in the case of like someone, if they were as a hostage or the people that they did see that were kind of hanging out, they were like, nope, I'm going to risk my life a little bit by putting myself in a more dangerous position to go save this person.
I believe we have a great encounter here that I would love to either run or play. To recap, just real quick, like the 10-second recap.
Go for it.
A party comes along a farmhouse that they know has something going on, but the ghouls inside know they're coming. So they lay a brilliant trap. They lure them in with survivors to a rickety old building that's in poor condition. The heroes, because they're heroes, charge in and try to rescue. A melee ensues. Some of them fall through the floorboards or the stair railings as they're trying to fight their way towards the survivors. And just when they think they have the combat in hand, more ghouls spring through the windows or the rafters, and lay an even more thorough, ambush upon them. Because the characters have certain backgrounds and certain opinions, they have to decide, is this worth laying our life on the line for because we're in trouble, or should we retreat and live with the consequences, whether they're real or psychological consequences after that? Boy, does that sound a whole lot more interesting than I opened the door and killed the ghoul.
Yep. 100% more, way more interesting. Way more interesting. So that's our thoughts on like kind of some ways that you can spice up, make your combats and encounters, even your basic ones, just a little more interesting and give them a little more flavor. If you have encounters that you want us to talk about and kind of work through and improve for your benefit and for the benefit of everyone else, please leave a comment down below of that encounter so we can talk about it here on the show. We'll have other encounters and other types of encounters that we'll talk about. We'll talk about all sorts of different things here on the channel and on this podcast so that you can just get some more ideas on how you can run things. I imagine we'll talk about other kinds of encounters like ambushes in more detail and how you can run a successful ambush, how you can run maybe particular monsters, dragons, liches, those kind of things, how you can fight those kind of monsters and make those combats interesting. Maybe a heist encounter, maybe some social encounters. Who knows?
And if you're already, a way better game master than we are, because we are by no means the greatest game masters on the planet, try to stump us. Send us something tough. We'll take a whack at it.
Yeah, or tell us something that that we didn't think of that you would add to the encounter to make it even better in your opinion.
Yes,
I'd love to hear how you guys would modify these encounters yourselves as well. With that, we will see you all next time.